Well, in the nearly 3 weeks since 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri, we have heard Brown supporters repeatedly ask, how can an officer feel so threatened by an unarmed man that he had to shoot him 6 times? Perhaps more. 6 bullets landed in Michael Brown. Consider the argument found in this videotape of a violent confrontation between an officer and an unarmed suspect. We warn you, this tape is disturbing. The officer lived.
Get in the car. Go, baby, I can't go to jail.
I can't go to jail. Judge Alex Ferrer is host of the nationally syndicated show Judge Alex. He's a retired Florida Circuit Court judge and a former police officer. I want to make very clear, this bears no relation to the Michael Brown case. We have no information that Michael Brown did anything like that. We'll have to wait to hear the officer's story. But your point as a former cop is that police officers have a different mindset when they go out on the job than the rest of us and when they confront somebody who's a potential suspect.
Absolutely, Megan. Police officers are taught from day one in the police academy to be wary of suspects or persons they're dealing with in public, because like in this particular case that you saw, that woman pulled that gentleman over for speeding. Turns out he was on parole and he didn't want to go back to jail. She had no way of knowing that, and it could have led to her death. You see at the end of the tape, after he brutally beats her, he reaches down to where her gun would be. I don't know if he was trying to pull her gun out or not, but that certainly is one possibility. So when people say to me, oh, how can a police officer justify shooting an unarmed person? My response is usually unarmed people can kill police officers just like armed people can. All they have to do is get the gun away from the officer, and sometimes that's even easier when you're unarmed because the officer's not going to draw.
And obviously the second tragedy in that video clip is the man's young daughter watching it and pleading with him. It's just horrifying. And by the way, he's in jail. But the case in Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, it has Michael Brown, by all witness accounts, 35 feet away from the officer. I haven't heard one witness say that he wasn't running away from the officer. Then there's a dispute about whether he turned around and started to come back at the officer. But it seems as though he was running away, at least when the first bullets were fired. That's how it seems right now. With, there's an asterisk on all of this till we hear the cop's story. How can you justify shooting a suspect who's running away?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear, I'm not here to justify anything.
No, correct.
It seems like every time I take a position on some law in the case,
legally, I'd like to know the law.
One side or the other takes offense with it. Legally, the law used to be that police officers could shoot any fleeing suspect, and that was changed under Tennessee versus Garner in '85 to require that it be a suspect who was involved in a crime, or that the officer reasonably believed or had probable cause to believe was involved in a crime where there was either violence or threat of violence, possible serious injury.
So if Michael Brown had punched the police officer in his patrol car and the gun went off and then he ran away, would that justify the officer potentially? Because that would have been a crime to assault a police officer.
Yes, and more than that, there's an allegation that they fought for the gun in the car, that he was trying to take the gun away from him. Now, again, we don't know any of that to be true. That may be totally made up.
Right.
But if you look at those facts, and those facts are later on proven to exist, or at least presented to the jury, under Tennessee versus Garner, that would satisfy a police officer shooting at a fleeing felon in that scenario. Missouri law actually is broader than that, but that would make Missouri law unconstitutional, and they have to be held to the standard of Tennessee versus Garner.
Even 6 bullets into Michael Brown and perhaps as many as 10 or more shots fired?
Well, every detail is going to have to be looked at to find out whether force is justified. If the officer needs to use deadly force until the person goes down and it takes 6 rounds or 10 rounds fired, that would be justifiable. But just as easily, if the individual turns around and puts his hand up, that's it. The officer's not justified from that point on firing another round, and he should be prosecuted.
I want to get to one other question that people have been, some viewers have been asking me. They want to know whether Michael Brown had a juvenile arrest record and whether that will be accessible. This is from the viewers who are wondering about whether that's, because there's a lawsuit actually right now trying to get at that. Do people have the right to see that?
No. They don't have the right to see that. Missouri law protects juvenile records. The only time it would come in is, for example, if Michael Brown had committed a crime and it was needed for the pre-sentence investigation report or it was relevant to that crime. In this case, you know, it really would not come in at all because it's very difficult to get a victim's prior record, assuming there were any crimes of violence. And as far as we know, Michael Brown had no priors.
Right.
Assuming there were any prior crimes of violence, the police officer would have to know about it in order for it to be relevant to the actions that he took.
Right. Otherwise, you're just putting it in evidence to show that this was a bad person, which is not okay to do.
And let me just say one more thing. Just because the Tennessee versus Garner case or law in the United States allows a police officer to shoot a fleeing felon doesn't mean I think it's a good idea to do that. I'm just saying that they have broad authority in taking people into custody.
I mean, if it's true that he turned around and he started going back after the officer, as some claim, you know, as some woman claim, then that's one thing. But you know, if he was shooting him as he's running away from the danger, the incident at the car is over, and he's running away, and the incident should be over, but for an arrest, then that raises all sorts of legal questions. Judge, great to see you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, for nearly 2 weeks, law enforcement in Ferguson, Missouri was locked in street battles with protesters, and now Ferguson may pay a very big price for that. The mayor's next.